Part 1. No one marries a fat girl, sir, but I can cook, she said quietly, her voice steady only because she had practiced those words her whole life. The kitchen of the Hart Ranch smelled of coffee gone cold and dust carried in from the plains. Eleanor stood just inside the doorway, clutching the strap of her worn bag as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the floor. She hadn't been invited to sit. She never assumed she would be. People like her learned early not to take up space unless given permission. Caleb Hart leaned against the wooden table, arms crossed, his face unreadable. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered in a way that came from years of work rather than comfort. His hair was streaked with early gray, and his eyes, sharp, tired, observant, rested on her without flickering away. Most men glanced, judged, and looked elsewhere fast, as if afraid her shape might somehow stain them. He didn't. Eleanor swallowed. She hated interviews, hated the way they turned her life into a list of apologies. The town had laughed when she told them she was answering an ad to marry a rancher she'd never met. A wife wanted, practical arrangement, respect guaranteed. That's what the notice had said. No romance promised, no beauty requested. Still, the laughter had followed her all the way to the ranch gate. She cleared her throat. I've worked as a cook for 7 years. Cafes, boarding houses, one hotel before it shut down. I can bake, preserve, butcher, plan meals for hands. I don't complain, and I don't waste. The words rushed out, rehearsed, safe. Skills were safer than feelings. Caleb listened without interrupting, but Eleanor felt the familiar heat rise in her face. She knew what he saw. The roundness she couldn't hide, the dress chosen carefully to look neat instead of flattering. She'd washed her hair twice, braided it tight, hoping cleanliness might make up for everything else. I know I'm not, she hesitated, then forced herself onward. Experience had taught her that saying it herself made rejection quicker. Cleaner. I know I'm not what men usually want. That's why I'm being honest. Silence stretched. The old clock on the wall ticked loud enough to sound like judgment. Caleb finally shifted, pulling out a chair. Sit, he said. The single word startled her. She obeyed instantly, lowering herself onto the edge like she might be asked to stand again any second. He poured fresh coffee into 2 cups, sliding one toward her. The small kindness unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the mug to hide the faint shaking. You didn't have to insult yourself, Caleb said, not unkindly. She gave a humorless smile. If I don't, others will. Saves time. That earned a flicker of something in his eyes, anger, maybe, or recognition. He studied the calluses on her hands, the careful way she held herself like someone bracing for a blow. Why answer my ad? He asked. She looked down. The truth felt heavier than she'd planned to carry. Because I'm tired of being passed over. For work. For life. Because I want a home where I'm useful. Where I don't have to pretend I'm someone else. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Caleb thought of the empty bedroom down the hall, the second plate he never said anymore, the way the house echoed at night. He hadn't expected courage to walk in wearing an apron and fear. Eleanor lifted her eyes at last. I won't embarrass you, she said softly. I won't expect affection. Just respect, and a place to belong. The words landed hard. Caleb realized this wasn't a woman asking to be chosen. This was a woman asking not to be discarded. No one marries a fat girl, sir, but I can cook, she repeated, quieter now, like a sentence she'd carved into herself long ago. Caleb didn't answer right away. He didn't look away either. And in that long, unfamiliar pause, Eleanor felt something she had never allowed herself before. Hope, trembling and dangerous, waiting to be either crushed or changed forever. Part 2. Caleb did not speak immediately. He lifted his coffee, took a slow sip, and set the cup down with deliberate care, as if the space between his thoughts needed gentleness. Eleanor watched every movement, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he could hear it. Silence usually meant the beginning of the end. She braced herself for polite words, for a softened refusal. I didn't ask for a cook, he said at last. The sentence struck like a door closing. Eleanor nodded quickly, standing before he could finish, before pity could bloom in his voice. Of course, sir. I understand. Thank you for the coffee. I won't take more of your. I asked for someone who would stay. Her breath caught. She froze mid-step, one hand gripping the back of the chair, afraid that if she moved, the moment would break. Slowly, she turned back to him. Caleb rose from the table then, not looming, but steady, like a man used to facing storms. This ranch doesn't need decoration, he continued. And I'm not looking to impress the town. His jaw tightened slightly. I need a partner who won't disappear when things get hard. Eleanor stared at him, her mind scrambling for the trick. Men didn't speak like this. Not to women like her. There was always a condition, always a hidden price. You don't. Her voice wavered. You don't care how I look. Caleb exhaled through his nose, something between a sigh and a dry laugh. I care how honest you are. And you've been honest since you walked in. He gestured toward the window, where the land stretched wide and unforgiving. My wife died 3 years ago. Fever took her in less than a week. Since then, this house has been quiet in ways that feel wrong. His voice roughened. I don't need someone to replace her. I need someone who understands what it means to live with absence. Eleanor's throat tightened. She knew absence. It sat beside her at every table, followed her through rooms where laughter once belonged to other people. I'm not gentle, Caleb went on. The work is long. The nights are lonely. The town will talk, no matter who stands at my side. His eyes met hers squarely. If you think marriage is about being thin enough or pretty enough, then you've been lied to. The words cracked something inside her. All her life, worth had been measured in mirrors and whispers. She had learned to shrink, to bargain, to accept less before less was forced upon her. I don't want to be pitied, she said suddenly, fear sharpening her tone. I won't survive that. Caleb nodded once. Good, neither will I. He walked toward her, stopping a careful distance away. I won't promise romance, he said honestly. I won't pretend this is a storybook. But I can promise respect. Safety. A place where you don't have to earn your right to exist. Eleanor's eyes burned. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let tears fall. Tears were for private places, not negotiations. What if I fail? She whispered. What if I'm not enough? Caleb's answer came without hesitation. Then we fail together. The simplicity of it shook her more than grand declarations ever could. Together was a word she'd rarely been offered. She sat back down slowly, like someone testing ice for the first time. I cook because it's the one thing I was allowed to be good at, she confessed. It made me useful. Invisible, but useful. I don't want you invisible, Caleb said. That was when she believed him, just a little. Not fully. Belief came in careful steps. But enough to stay seated. Enough to breathe. They talked then, about practical things. About the ranch hands, the house, expectations. Caleb never once mentioned her body again. Never glanced away when she spoke. Never rushed her words. When Eleanor finally stood to leave, the sun was dipping low, painting the room in gold. Caleb walked her to the door. Think about it, he said. No pressure. No rush. She paused on the porch, the wind tugging at her dress. If I say yes, she asked, will you ever regret choosing me? Caleb looked at her, truly looked. I think, he said carefully, that regret comes from ignoring what you need. And today, I didn't. Eleanor stepped down from the porch with shaking legs, her heart dangerously light. For the first time in her life, the future didn't feel like a closed door, it felt like a hand held open, waiting to see if she would dare step through. Part 3. The wedding was quiet. No grand hall, no gossiping crowd, no ruffles or velvet gowns. Just Caleb, Eleanor, a local preacher who knew better than to make a spectacle, and the cattle lowing softly in the distance. Eleanor wore a simple dress, clean and pressed, but nothing meant to impress. She had spent years learning that beauty was temporary, that effort alone could never erase shame. Tonight, she wanted only to be herself. Caleb stood at the altar, his broad hands steady, eyes calm and sure. Eleanor noticed the little things, the way he arranged his fingers, the set of his shoulders, the way he inhaled through the deep quiet of the plains. He looked like a man used to weathering storms, and somehow, she realized, he wanted her to weather them alongside him. Not as an accessory, not as someone to fill a void, but as an equal, someone who mattered. When they exchanged vows, Eleanor's voice trembled at first. Not from fear of him, but from fear of believing she could be loved. I promise, she said, to be honest. To do my best. To live in this house and in this life as fully as I can, even when I'm afraid. Caleb smiled, small but certain. I promise to respect you, to honor your presence in this home, and to face whatever comes, together. You will never stand alone here. That night, the house felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. The fire in the hearth crackled, sending shadows dancing across walls that had once been cold and silent. Eleanor cooked their first dinner as a married couple, the aroma of roast beef and fresh bread filling the air. Caleb watched her from the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, silent but fully present. It was the way he watched, Eleanor realized, that made her feel like she could belong anywhere, not just here, not just at this table, but in life. At first, life didn't magically soften. The townspeople still whispered, old insecurities still clawed at her mind. Mirrors were still cruel, but Eleanor began to notice subtle changes within herself. She laughed more freely when Caleb made a joke at the kitchen counter. She stayed up later at night, talking to him about trivial things and heavy things alike. Her hands no longer trembled when she served a meal. Her heart no longer flinched at the idea of being seen. One evening, months later, as the sky burned pink with sunset and the cattle settled into the cool grass, Eleanor caught Caleb watching her. She had just finished kneading dough, flour dusting her hair and forearms, and for a moment, she feared his gaze would be pity, gratitude, or that old, familiar judgment she had carried all her life. Instead, he smiled, calm, deep, and unwavering. His eyes held something dangerous and soft all at once. Love, she realized. Love not given out of duty, nor out of attraction alone, but out of recognition. Recognition that she existed fully, unapologetically, and that existence alone was enough. No one marries a fat girl, she murmured, old habits dying slowly, her voice more curious than defeated. Caleb's hand found hers. Warmth spread up her arm. That's not true, he said gently. A man marries the woman who changes his life. Eleanor blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. I changed your life, she whispered. You've done more than that, he said. You've saved it. You've saved me. The words felt heavier than any weight she had carried, yet lighter than air. She laughed quietly, a sound unfamiliar even to herself. And for the first time, she let herself believe it. Not the fantasy, not the idea, but the truth. She was seen, loved, and wanted, exactly as she was. In the months that followed, Eleanor's confidence grew, not from vanity, but from acceptance. She cooked for Caleb, for the ranch hands, for neighbors who stopped by, but the food became more than sustenance, it became love made tangible. Caleb learned the rhythm of her life, the little things that made her laugh or pause. And slowly, Eleanor stopped apologizing for taking space, for speaking her mind, for existing in a world that had once told her she wasn't enough. One stormy night, when wind rattled windows and rain pounded the roof, Eleanor sat beside Caleb by the fire, their hands entwined. I used to think the world would never let someone like me be happy, she confessed softly. And now, Caleb asked, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. Now, she said, her voice firm, I know it can. Caleb kissed her forehead and smiled. You already have. The house felt warmer that night. The fire burned brighter, and somewhere in the silence of the plains, Eleanor finally understood that love was not about changing herself to fit someone else's mold. It was about standing in the light of a man who saw her fully, and choosing, every day, to stand beside him. For Eleanor, for Caleb, for the quiet house that had waited so long, life had finally begun. And it would never be the same again.